In 1997, Boeing made a decision that looked like strategy, but became the beginning of a catastrophe. A merger celebrated by Wall Street, praised by executives, and quietly feared by the engineers who built the company's legacy. Inside Boeing, people whispered the same phrase. McDonnell Douglas didn't merge with Boeing. McDonnell Douglas took over Boeing. What followed wasn't one mistake. It was a cultural collapse, slow, silent, and deadly. A company built on safety transformed into a company built on speed, and eventually people paid for it with their lives. Because before the merger, Boeing was an engineering company, a place where safety was sacred, a place where the product mattered more than profits and spreadsheets, a place where a single loose bolt could delay a launch and nobody apologized for it. They were meticulous, obsessive, paranoid even, and that paranoia saved lives. But after the merger, something changed. The engineers lost power. The financial executives gained it. Shareholder value became the mission. Wall Street became the customer. And the airplanes, the thing that once defined the company, became a product to optimize instead of a responsibility to uphold. This is the story of how Boeing lost its way, how cost-cutting replaced craftsmanship, how speed replaced safety, how silence replaced accountability, and how one of the most trusted brands in American history began to fall apart, one decision, one corner cut at a time. And it begins with the plane that almost broke the company, the 737 MAX. But to understand how the MAX disaster happened, you have to understand the pressure that created it. Because Boeing didn't wake up one morning and decide to design a flawed airplane. Boeing was pushed into a corner created by a competitor the company underestimated for years. In 2010, Airbus announced a new aircraft, the A320neo. It wasn't a revolution, it was a quiet upgrade, more efficient engines, better fuel burn, lower costs for airlines. But it had something Boeing didn't expect: enormous demand. Airlines loved it. It was cheaper to operate, cheaper to maintain. And crucially, pilots already certified on the A320 could fly the Neo without expensive training. It meant Airbus had a plane that saved airlines millions and required almost no transition cost. The moment Boeing saw airline after airline ordering the A320neo, something snapped. They knew what it meant. If they didn't respond immediately, Airbus would dominate the single-aisle market, the most profitable segment in commercial aviation. Boeing had two choices: build a brand new aircraft or modify an existing one. A new aircraft would take 10 years. It would cost tens of billions, and Wall Street would punish them for it. Investors wanted speed, airlines wanted speed, executives wanted speed. So Boeing made a choice, the choice that would define everything that followed. They chose to update the 737 instead of building something new. But there was a problem. The 737 was old, very old. Its original design dated back to the 1960s, long before modern engines existed. New engines didn't fit under its low wings. So Boeing lifted them, moved them forward, changed the aerodynamics, and didn't want to tell pilots how different the plane really was. Because if pilots needed extra training, Boeing would lose sales, airlines would resist the cost, Airbus would win. So instead of redesigning the aircraft, Boeing redesigned the narrative. They introduced a software system called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. It wasn't meant to improve performance, it was meant to hide the fact that the plane behaved differently than the one before it. If the nose pitched too high, MCAS would push it down, automatically, silently, reliably, in theory. But Boeing made a decision that would echo across continents. They built MKS to rely on a single sensor, one point of failure, one piece of hardware that could be damaged, obstructed, or malfunctioning, and there was no backup. And because Boeing wanted to avoid costly pilot retraining, they didn't tell pilots MCAS existed. They didn't include it in manuals. They didn't require simulator training. They didn't explain the system. They buried it under the logic that it was too trivial to discuss. They thought they could mask the aerodynamics. They thought they could bridge a design flaw with software. They thought nothing would go wrong. Until everything did. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta. Minutes into the flight, the aircraft began pushing its nose down. The pilots pulled it back up. MCAS triggered again. The pilots fought it. They didn't know the system existed. They didn't know why it was forcing the plane downward. They didn't know the sensor had malfunctioned. The plane dove into the sea. All 189 people on board died. the world mourned. Investigators searched, Boeing reassured. They called it an anomaly, a tragic coincidence, a foreign airline with maintenance issues, a sensor problem.
Boeing insisted the first crash was an anomaly, a foreign airline issue, a sensor glitch, nothing to do with them. Publicly, they said the 737 MAX was safe. Privately, engineers sent emails calling the plane designed by clowns, admitting they wouldn't let their own families fly on it. Warnings were raised and ignored. 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed for the same reason. A single faulty sensor, triggering a system most pilots didn't even know existed. 157 dead. 2 crashes, same cause, both preventable. But the MAX disaster wasn't just technical failure, it was cultural rot. After the 1997 merger, Boeing shifted from engineering excellence to cost-cutting obsession. Workers were pressured, complaints buried, engineers overruled by accountants. Even after the MAX grounding, Boeing didn't slow down. They rushed production back online, promised fixes, claimed lessons learned. Yet problems kept showing up. Loose bolts in 2023, and in 2024, an Alaska Airlines door plug blew off mid-flight. Missing bolts, sloppy assembly, more investigations, more shaken trust. The pattern is obvious: shortcuts, denial, pressure, repeat. The 737 MAX didn't crash because of one sensor. It crashed because the company's culture collapsed. When a business that builds airplanes starts prioritizing speed over safety and optics over honesty, disaster isn't a risk. It's guaranteed. Boeing can recover, but not until it confronts the culture that produced these failures. Safety isn't a feature, it's a mindset. Lose that and you lose everything: trust, reputation, and lives.